Okay, so in the last podcast, I talked about the importance of citation. It leaves that paper trail. So other historians, other scholars, or anybody, one of the cool things about being a historian is you don't have to be a professor to be a historian. It's harder to be a scientist and not be attached to a university or some big institute because it's so expensive to be a scientist. But anybody can can be a historian. A couple of years ago, I uh, reviewed a fantastic book on the role of New Orleans in the Texas Revolution, written by a local San Antonio high school teacher, and he found some historical information that no one had discovered before. So it's kind of cool about history. It's not just trapped inside the walls of universities, and there's a lot of good historians who are not academics, and actually some of the best histories are written by non-academics for reasons that we can talk about at another time. So anyway, you don't have to be a scholar to double check evidence. Okay, so it leaves that paper trail. Where did you get your evidence that you're using? So other folks, other scholars can make sure that that evidence really exists. And even if it exists, like the example of the Tom Brady runaway, sure, you could have a pro slavery narrative. Even though it allows scholars to go even further, they could say, well, okay, this evidence did exist, but I've looked at it and I find out that it's inaccurate at the time, that it was written by a pro-Southern white in order to defend slavery. So what we want to do, the cliche now is, but it's important. What footnotes do is they make our arguments and our evidence, the presentation of our evidence, as transparent as possible so that folks that are coming along can believe what we're saying. Now, as I'll talk about over the course of the semester, historians emphasize and de emphasize certain facts. That's a kind of another subtlety, right? So you can look at a piece of evidence and you can pull out that really exists in time, like Harriet Jacobs, and you can focus on some things and not focus on the other. But for the time being, let's just stick to the nuts and bolts here. And citation is important to make sure that the evidence that you're using to write your history actually exists and it can be interrogated by other scholars. Okay, so that's really the most important point of citation. Now, citation, this is number two now. The other thing about citation, what we call footnotes, is that it is very convenient because it allows, let's say you're doing a topic on slave females, and you read a book and you go to the footnotes and you can see just at this footnote very conveniently all the books that the historian that you're reading, all the books that that historian is citing. And so by looking at footnotes, you can see who was written what about the topic that you're interested in. So footnotes are a fantastic shortcut and an essential shortcut to anybody doing any kind of research. As you move on in your career at UTSA, you should just start looking at footnotes and to see, okay, who else has written about this topic? Who else has written about this subject? Do I need to look at this book? The other nice thing about footnotes is that footnotes can take you to primary evidence. Let's say, and footnotes, this should be clear, but maybe it's really not. So let me clarify it. The only way footnotes would appear in a piece of primary evidence is if an editor came in and put in the footnotes themselves. So Dr. Clinton, as you saw on Tuesday, she took this diary, the Mary Chestnut Diary, and she published it. She published it with a short introduction. Remember, she talks about being dragged to movie theaters when she was a kid. So her short introduction is contextualizes the Mary Chestnut book. Mary Chestnut was a white slaveholder, But then what Dr. Clinton might have done is she might have put footnotes in the Mary Chestnut book just to explain like obscure phrases, for instance, that in 2017 people would not understand. So a general rule of thumb is that the that primary evidence does not have footnotes unless a historian has come along later and put the footnotes in to explain to a modern day reader some obscure aspects of the time that the document was being written. So to go back to my number two, footnotes are very convenient because they signal to you the lay of the land in the sense of what is the scholarship on a certain topic. And the other thing is footnotes can take you to primary evidence. They can take you to things like Mary Chestnut's diary. Maybe you had never heard of it, and you read another book. You were interested in Southern women, and you're reading an article on Southern women, and you look at the footnote, and it says Mary Chestnut's diary, and you go, aha, Mary Chestnut's diary. Now I'm going to go look at that. So footnotes, again, they leave a paper trail in the sense of letting you know what has been written about the subject that you're interested in, both in the sense of secondary works, the kind of thing that I do and my colleagues at UTSA do, and any historians do, where we contextualize evidence, and primary evidence that exists as well. So that's the second thing that footnotes do. They give you a shortcut into what has been written about a subject, both by other historians, number one, and then clues to what the primary evidence is about the subject that you're interested in as well. Okay? So footnotes they're very powerful. They're an absolutely essential part of any kind of historical text. Now, one of the things about footnotes is there's a saying in publishing that for every footnote that's in a book, you lose like 5,000 readers. To be honest, I'm sure very few of you have ever read a book that has footnotes and checked the footnotes to see the veracity. But once you move more into your historical studies, I want you to be aware of footnotes, and I want you to start using footnotes. Where did this person get their evidence? Is this a proper use of evidence? Who else has written about this subject? Well, I'll look in a footnote. Who does the author cite? Is there primary evidence about this subject that I don't know about? Well, I'll look at a footnote and I'll see. So footnotes are extremely powerful. They're essential to the historical process in all kinds of ways. And I'm talking in terms of footnotes. The bigger word I'm using here is citation. To cite your work, proper citation. And as I said in the first podcast, what I've come to understand in the last couple of years is the power of teaching historical methods students about citation, about how to cite primary and secondary material correctly, and then how to become fluent in the language of footnotes, how to be comfortable in looking at footnotes and understanding what it is you're seeing. What I had realized is that and again, it's kind of like speaking, you're speaking English, but it's kind of like speaking a foreign language. What I realized just in the last couple of years is I'm so I'm so used to looking at footnotes that I don't even think that someone might not know how to do it or their importance. That's what I had realized about myself, and I was not being an effective teacher. I made assumptions that students understood the importance of citation, footnotes. It means the same exact thing. That students understood the importance of citation, that they knew how to maneuver through citation, because by this point in my career, it's become second nature to me. I don't even think about it. Well, I don't think it's second nature to you guys, and I don't think it's second nature to any 2000s. It'd be a very unusual student that would be aware of the importance of citation and the ability to kind of work your way through citation. So that leads back to my essential point that I made, I think, at the beginning of all this, that this is why I spend so much time working on citation. It seems very technical and dumb and boring, and it is boring, by the way, but it has to be done correctly. It's essential for the historical process. Really, what what I would say, and maybe the way I would sum up this lecture is, it's essential in the search for truth to the extent that we can find truth in our primary and our secondary evidence. Without footnotes, anybody could say anything about any subject. That it would nothing would be grounded at all. And as much trouble as we're in 27, well, we're 2018, did I say 2017? I still haven't turned the calendar. As much trouble as we're in 2018, we would be in a lot more trouble without citation, without showing where we got our evidence so people could go and double check and that the evidence exists and that it's being used in a proper way. Now, that very seldom happens, right? People very, only specialists go back and double check. But you know what? Some people do, and it's important that it's there. It's important that it's possible that you're able to do it. And then secondarily, the other thing about citation for researchers, it lets you know who else has written about your subject, and lets you, and it sends you to primary evidence about your subject because footnotes contain that information. So footnotes are incredibly powerful, and probably one of the key goals of this course is to make you very fluent, very facile in the ability to cite correctly and to understand how to utilize footnotes to make yourself a successful history student.